Okay, well, good morning and thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Greg Hobson and I'm a partner and co-practice lead for the institutional consulting group at Greenspring Advisors. We help companies design, build, and maintain their workforce retirement plans by helping them manage their fiduciary liability, investments, plan-related fees, and vendor relationships. We also provide many of our clients their employees access to our financial wellness and fiduciary advice platform called Clarity at Work, which is delivered by a team of investment professionals and certified financial planners, also known as CFPs. Personally, I've been in the retirement industry longer than I wish to divulge, but let's just say that I'm eligible to make catch-up contributions to my 401k plan. So before I introduce our expert panelist, let's kind of go review the format and a little bit of the technology information. So we've had a bunch of people that have joined the webinar and everybody's line is muted. We have a lot of great information to cover today, including some questions that were submitted during the registration, which we'll highlight. And we can take questions from you. So if you go to the Q&A section of the Zoom toolbar, you should be able to submit those and I'll be able to help monitor those as Sarah's going through the presentation. Finally, this program is available for one PDC continuing education credit for SHRM recertification. So we'll email that PDC code to the individuals that participate for the entire session by the end of this week. So expect to get that and along with the recording if there's anything that you happen to miss along the way. Now that we have that down, let me introduce our topic of today, which has been certainly a hot topic of conversation for HR professionals, executives, managers, and business owners over the last few years. Personally, before I joined Greenspring Advisors in 2017, I worked for larger investment companies where I was a W-2 employee that had a retirement plan book of business. I interacted with HR professionals, business owners, and executives as part of the retirement plan committees, and the people that worked with or for me at those firms were employees of the big firms. So I didn't really get too involved in employee engagement management, and that rapidly changed in 2017 upon my arrival at Greenspring. And we were small, only 16 employees at the time, but I vividly remember my first partners meeting when we implemented and discussed an improvement plan for a particular employee that was struggling along the way. And then several months later, at 3 or 4 partner meetings later, we were considering terminating that employee. And now we're close to 40 employees, and I co-manage our institutional consulting team. And employee engagement and management is a key to our success and our client success, just like all business leaders that are doing this. Many of us, including myself, weren't trained for all that goes into this. So honestly, we heavily rely on our director of people operations here, who's terrific, Laura Stoner, and outside counsel like Sarah Sawyer. So by the way of background, Sarah is an experienced business advisor and litigator. She works with business owners at all stages of running their business, from starting businesses and implementing policies and practices to keep their businesses running smoothly, to help them avoid expensive legal battles along the way. She focuses on, among other things, providing her clients with general business counsel, drafting and analyzing complex contracts, mergers and acquisitions, employee compliance, which obviously is a big key for today, dispute resolution, and litigating all aspects of civil and commercial disputes. So with a diverse background of representing an array of business clients in private practice and working as in-house counsel as well, she recognizes the importance of understanding all aspects of a client's business when she's providing that advice, whether it's compliance and employee relations or litigation business strategy related. So when counseling clients, she takes the time to understand the ins and outs of her client's business and employs a very holistic approach when addressing their legal needs. And I can speak to this firsthand, how great she has been along the way over the last couple of years for us at Greenspring when we've needed her services. And not to mention, she is a great follow on LinkedIn, especially for her OK at Work series with Russell Berger, who is also at Offit Kurman. So now for the agenda. Sarah's taken the time to put together a number of slides on the broad topic of engaging and managing employees. And in preparation for the meeting, we thought we should really narrow that focus to, four key areas. So this is where I'm going to start to share the slides for everybody. And hopefully everybody can see those, right? Sarah, can you see the slide there?
Yep, I can. Yep.
Perfect.
Good.
So, those four key areas are managing a remote / hybrid workplace, quiet quitting and quiet firing, two terms I hadn't heard, I don't know, 17 months ago, maybe even a year ago. Employee productivity tracking and employee compensation strategy, all areas that I know all business owners, executives, HR professionals are dealing with on a daily basis and trying to navigate, the new world that's been created post-COVID. And the first one is the hybrid remote workforce, which depending upon the type of business that you're in, is definitely an area that we have put in place certain policies and procedures, which I think are working pretty well. I think our employees like our policies, but it's different for everybody and their different lines of business. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and get on to the first slide. So Sarah, all yours.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for that great introduction. And just to verify, you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us and on these important topics. So kind of kicking it off here with the hybrid / remote work. So this is something that obviously during the COVID pandemic became a really hot topic when everyone sent their employees home. Even people who had never had remote workforces before or hybrid workforces. I know that was a lot of our employees, our admins and different folks didn't have laptops. We were rushing to get them laptops, get them ways to work from home. And ever since then, we've really seen this still be a large trend, having people working from home, these hybrid scenarios. And then definitely in the hiring process, people expecting that, and then just companies seeing that they can really open up their potential employee pool by doing hybrid or remote work. Definitely here to stay. I actually do work with our recruiters some here at the firm at Offit Kurman. And, I think our recruiters told us recently that if we limited remote work, that we would cut our employee pool in half as far as who would be willing to even take an interview with us. So definitely a huge appetite for remote work still and hybrid environments out there. So this is not going away. This is not just a COVID thing. Definitely seeing a lot of employers implement this long-term, get rid of in-person offices, and then a lot of folks doing what you described, Greg, which is the hybrid environment where they've got people coming in sometimes, having more flexibility, working from home, things like that. So really a lot of adjustments that are going on here. Slide, please. So just by the numbers, kind of just to confirm what we anecdotally are talking about here is that 58% or the equivalent of 92 million people say they can work remotely. This is from a McKinsey study. I believe it's 2021. So obviously there's some jobs out there that can't be done remotely. A lot of the what we consider traditionally blue collar jobs or Main Street jobs or manufacturing, anything that requires in person, but pretty challenging to do some of those things, to make widgets from home, right? So especially if you need equipment, but for a lot of jobs there is an ability to do a hybrid environment. 87% of workers offered some remote work will embrace it and take advantage of that. And on average, workers who are offered flexible work week are working an average of 3.3 days a week from home. And then the ability to work remotely is the third highest motivating factor for job seekers, behind greater pay or better hours and better career opportunities. So they're all kind of ranking neck and neck with each other. Greater pay kind of outweighs those, the better career opportunities and the remote work, but they're still pretty high up there in what workers are considering right now. And the one thing that I did find in reading this study that will kind of be a perfect segue into talking about considerations for employers and for managers in a remote environment is that employees in this study were also reporting a lot of obstacles to peak performance. So that's kind of where we're at in the environment right now, is that employees are enjoying working from home, having a hybrid situation, but admittedly are also dealing with productivity issues, seeing if they're meeting their full capacity and full career opportunities by working from home. So those are things, some employees have reported obstacles with, different challenges at home, caretaking responsibilities, childcare, whether it's different distractions at home and different issues, not feeling as connected with the office and different things of that nature. Slide, please. So when we're talking about some management strategies with remote work, one of the main things to do is to consider your policies. So I know, Greg, you mentioned you have some flexibility options at Greenspring. A lot of my clients are doing a hybrid environment, and having policies that address what the new environment is and making sure that your policies are updated. It's always a good place to start, because it's a good place for you to start thinking critically about, well, what are we doing? Is our handbook reflective of that? Because a lot of folks had remote work policies prior to COVID or prior to promoting more hybrid environments and more working at home, but they haven't updated them. So I know I have some clients that maybe it used to be 5 days a month or 5 days a year or whatever it is that they could work remotely. Well, since then they've adjusted that and they're doing a lot more flexibility, but they haven't gone back and adjusted their policies. So that's one place to really start and to think critically about these things. Also, something to consider on the legal liability side of things is making sure that you're including disclosures about reporting for workers' compensation when people are at home. So even though they're not in the office, if they injure themselves on the job in their remote work environment, that is, depending on the facts and circumstances, obviously could be covered by workers' compensation. So policies around that. And another thing that we're really seeing is really having to figure out, well, how are we continuing to create a culture, a reporting environment, training, managing with remote workers. Just because you're not seeing them in person doesn't mean they don't still need assistance and help and management and resources. So really don't want to forget about training, whether it be training for doing their job or sexual harassment training, any other types of training that you would be normally doing in the office on an annual basis or semi-annual basis. Talking about those things, still doing that in a virtual environment, or if you're doing hybrid, having people come in and do still participate in those trainings. I've also found that, go ahead, Greg.
No, so Sarah, I was going to ask, you would just kind of mention, one of the things around from a compliance perspective, or from a perspective of getting injured at home, right? That being covered. There's a lot of legal challenges, I would imagine, with if somebody slips in their own bathtub, right? Or maybe that's they're getting ready for work, so that's not considered their work day yet. How do you navigate that? What's sort of included there and what's not? And how do you review your policy to ensure that you got that the organization is covered and the employees properly covered?
Yeah. So in the policy and when you're getting your employees set up, is to make sure that you're encouraging employees to have a dedicated workspace that is their workspace, sending them the equipment that they might need. So a desk, those types of things. And that's actually kind of the place I've actually seen this come up the most is when people are setting up their home office and they injure themselves doing that. Which I laugh because it's an unexpected and sounds almost like a funny scenario, but it actually happens fairly often. People are moving desks around. Just like if you're in the office, that happens often as well. Someone is moving a desk, moving a box, moving something. If you're in a more traditionally white collar professional services job, that might be a more likely way that you're going to see a workers' comp claim than if you're in a factory and someone, gets injured from a piece of equipment, or so, they have a more manual labor job. So those are the kinds of things we see with the work from home. So the way to adjust the policies is to just make people aware that they should be in a dedicated workspace, that they should be just as careful at home as they would be in the office to not injure themselves, and that if they do injure themselves, that is workers' compensation claim potentially, and that they should bring it to the attention of the company, because a lot of people aren't thinking about that. So it's an important thing to consider.
Right. Yeah, certainly. I wouldn't think about that at all in any way. If I were moving a desk around it to adjust for my, at home workplace. I think the other thing around, the management side of things is, and the culture side of things in terms of managing that workforce. What have you seen from creative employers that have been working, and some of the recommendations that you've had for your clients?
So having a lot of regular check-ins, proactively reaching out is a big one, and tightening up their metrics and their formal review process. So even outside of remote work environments, even if you have a full in-person workforce, this is an area where a lot of companies operate at a deficit, which is that they really don't have as structured of a review process of their employees. And that can be really challenging in person, but it becomes even more challenging when you've got a remote workforce. So talking from the employer side for a moment, as far as the liability and the legal side, which is where I hang out, is once you have a performance issue, if you're not documenting it well, if there's not regular performance reviews, if you're not staying on top of managing the employee, it can become really challenging to make sure that you are, first of all, treating everyone similarly as it relates to similar performance issues, and not accidentally or inadvertently discriminating in some way between groups of people. But it also just becomes challenging in case there were any claims of disparate treatment, or if there were any claims that came up, like someone's got a performance issue and then they have a disability and they make a disability request, but we don't have any documentation of that performance issue. So those are all really good reasons to have performance reviews, regular systems of how you're giving those reviews. Then we move to the remote work environment, and it becomes even more important, because if you're not seeing people, you're not interacting with them, there's so much more of a chance that there's going to be just this long period where maybe people aren't really at their peak performance, they're not getting the tools that they need, and the company may not notice it in the same way as if they were in person. The employees may also not come to the employer in the same way with a need for problems. So just from a practical standpoint as well, from quality control and from employee growth, that's also something to consider, is that when they're not in front of you and you're not in the office, it can become a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we've started to see, and just here at Greenspring, one of the things that we've started to implement is a mentor. So that it's not, obviously you want to have an open door policy to your manager, but sometimes, especially if you're crossing paths, like our remote is pretty much 2 to 3 days a week you're here, and so forth. But having the ability that you could be 2 ships passing in the night, where the 2 to 3 days never align for like 3 weeks almost. But if somebody's not totally comfortable with the manager, having somebody else at the organization as a mentor that they can check in with, it's more peer level, that they can work through, seems to be a good way to sort of ensure that those types of cultural things, as well as questions, are being answered and topics are being brought up.
Yeah, and from a schedule perspective as well, I've seen a lot of employers that when they're doing their hybrid setups, they're having people Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the office, Monday, Friday remote work, with some additional flexibility. So if you've got the plumber coming or something that on a Tuesday, that there's some flexibility there, but to try to have some of those meetings, and try to encourage people to be in meetings while they're in the office, help with that culture. And one other tool I've seen as well is really setting up a good virtual environment. So if you do have, because so many of my clients now have employees since COVID, they hired employees in other states where they don't have a physical office. So there's a lot more chance for people working fully remote, and creating a culture online, not in the metaverse necessarily, which I'm sure some employers do that. I haven't run into any of my clients doing that yet at this point, but creating, a water cooler online where people can share pictures of their pets and Halloween costumes, for instance, let's say, or creating that culture and that engagement. And people are more likely to reach out, more likely to report issues when they're feeling engaged and supported in some ways.
We have a water cooler, virtually, and there are a lot of laughs that way for people, whether they're in the office or out of the office. It does create that. Yeah. So let's move on to the next topic, or topics, quiet quitting and quiet firing, two very new terms in the at least to me, and certainly I think the hashtag world of Twitter and elsewhere have sort of brought these up. So Sarah, what can you kind of tell us about these, as you say here, trending terms that, quite honestly, the third one I literally had never heard of until you sent me the slides last week. So this is a total new one.
Yeah, so that's China's version of quiet quitting, I believe. So there's a lot of these terms I think people have probably seen. Quiet quitting is kind of where we started seeing this here, and the Great Resignation. Anyone who is involved in any hiring and employee staffing at their company, or a business owner, has run into the issues the Great Resignation has brought. I know I mentioned under the remote work piece that we had to offer remote work just to keep candidates in the pool. So it's definitely been a very challenging time for hiring. Quiet quitting is, one of those things where employees are not quitting their job, but they're checked out. So they're not going above and beyond. They're there, but they're looking. And it creates a lot of issues within the organization, because it's when you don't have engaged employees, that can really impact the culture. You're not getting the max out of your employees. And there's been a lot of talk online about the distinction between quiet quitting and work boundaries, because I think a lot during COVID, again, everyone was working from home with nothing else to do. So I know a lot of folks that, anecdotally, I've heard this a ton, is that they were like, well, I never stopped working because what else was I doing? I mean, I had nothing else to do. And so there's a reestablishment of boundaries, and it's just slightly different than quiet quitting. Then came quiet firing, which I will say, just don't do that. As a business owner, as a manager, quiet firing is not a good thing to be known for. It creates a lot of cultural issues and exposure. Quiet firing, like quiet quitting, is you don't terminate the employee, but you kind of just start leaving them out of meetings, making their job generally unpleasant, giving them roles that they know they don't really want to do, kind of hoping that they'll quit, that the problem will kind of just go away. And as you can imagine, as an attorney, Greg, I never recommend that employers take a passive role in that way. It can just lead to a lot of issues and incidental or accidental discrimination, claims of discrimination. Employees notice this. It creates a lot of culture issues, and it's really the opposite of what you and I were just talking about as far as managing people and actually trying to be proactive and documenting and helping, which is work. And I totally get that when employers and managers are wearing a lot of hats, that can be really challenging. But quiet firing's got a lot of consequences, especially when you're dealing with the Great Resignation and you're really hoping to have good people. Wouldn't recommend these things as well. So they're actually not new concepts. These things have taken place for a long time, but now we have fun terms for them that are trending. So next slide. So kind of what's really going on with this, is this really, because I also have heard from a lot of clients, well, what is this really happening? Is this overblown? Is this just this fun trending topic? Generally speaking, most employees are saying that they are not engaging in quiet quitting, though it's appealing to them. They're not doing the bare minimum. And then there's some polling and data out there that's saying that it's not really, it's been pretty steady. So it's not that this is a brand new topic. I definitely, before there was names for these things, saw both of these things happening. Both the quiet firing and the quiet quitting. And it's just now that it's just kind of on everyone's mind, given what's going on here. So it's not something to be ignored, but it's not necessarily something new either, is what I would say is the moral of the story here. Next slide. Yeah. So on this topic, I wanted to just kind of bring up this is something that I found through the Harvard Business Review, and really thought it was a very interesting way of diagramming and describing the issues with employees who are quiet quitting, and some of the issues that traditionally companies have within their organization with employees disengaging and the consequences of that. And this actually came out before quiet quitting was trending. So again, additional proof that that's been a thing. But we all know that when someone gives 2 weeks notice, they've been checked out for a lot longer than 2 weeks, right? So there's a huge amount of impact to that. And this is really where employers, I think, can be really proactive. And so when you say, what do we do about quiet quitting? What do we do about quiet firing? What do we do about the Great Resignation? Proactivity, engagement, and thinking bigger are the things that I see clients being successful with. So before employees are getting to this point of just complete resentment, quitting but staying, they're interviewing, and all of the consequences that come with that, you'll catch, kind of in this chart, before you get to this purple line, if you're engaged with your employees, you're managing, you're documenting, you're providing resources, you're putting people on PIPs if there's performance issues, you hopefully won't get to that purple line, right? And to actually open your mind a little bit too, as well as moving people into other roles, developing new roles, and being more proactive. So there's a lot of legal benefit to that as far as documenting and limiting risk, and a lot of practical and business sense reason for this as well. So it's a little bit more work to be that engaged with employees, but it will pay dividends in success at your company.
Yeah, and I think Sarah, as you kind of this chart is terrific, and I think it's really important for employers to look at it, and that falls on some direct managers, right? Basically to start to work through that process to ensure that they're the individuals that are starting down this path potentially of getting them early, and I would say certainly. A lot of people will say, well, it's a younger generation and that sort of thing. I would argue that it's not. It's everybody, right? That could become disengaged in some way, shape, or form. And when you think about you had mentioned kind of some of the legal concerns about quiet firing, which sounds just basically kind of like hazing or something from the movie Office Space, effectively. So, but this seems like a path forward rather than sort of quiet firing somebody is to see the polar opposite of just engaging with them. And sometimes that is in the green line that you can see here is a mutually agreed upon departure date, right? It doesn't always mean that person is there forever, because they might not be in the right scenario, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. And working through that so that you can manage the issue. And one area I really see from the legal compliance piece of things is that with ADA, FMLA, all of these various employment regulations, is if you're engaged in quiet firing and employees start to get disengaged, and you start leaving them out of meetings, and they start noticing that there can often be, and then something happens, there's a complaint, they make a complaint about that, they're like, I think I'm being treated differently, whatever it may be. Now you're on, not only are you down in this purple line, but now you're exposing yourself. So like, let's say someone moves their desk at the quit but staying stage. Everyone really wants this employee gone, no one's happy, but no one's addressing the issue. And now they're on workers' comp. They might be on leave. So now this purple line gets really long. It's like so when you sleep on these issues, you don't know what tomorrow's going to hold. So you don't know how long those things can get dragged out. But if you're on this, it's on my left, the left side, this green side, we'll call it. you're less likely to run into those types of issues and exposure and tough decisions you might have to make.
And Sarah, one of the questions that we got, someone was coming in around this topic, I'll sort of paraphrase the question a little bit, was what are you seeing from a, if you get it to a point where it's, hey, look, this isn't working, what are sort of the, departure sort of severance pays that you're seeing? Has that changed? Obviously, as compensation has changed, have you seen a change to the severance pays, the number of weeks per year, that sort of thing that we've kind of seen historically? Have you seen that increase over the last year or two?
I have. It's actually kind of balanced out a little bit. I saw it a little bit more during the pandemic, actually, because I think that folks felt more concerned about potentially there having been things that they've missed or issues that they might have, and just really wanted the peace of mind, and wanted people to kind of land on their feet. And there was also the unemployment issues, and there is an offset with the severance and with the unemployment insurance and things like that. So there was a little bit of that as well, where sometimes employees were less inclined to take severance because they were receiving such high unemployment, depending on the industry, depending on, I wouldn't be a good lawyer if I didn't say it depends many times throughout this presentation, right? But so that was where I kind of saw the trends being a little bit different. Historically and still now, always seeing a difference between levels. So executive employees versus lower ranking employees. And then just, for me, it's an assessment of risks as well. So we've got the standard severance, and that, which is a lot of companies will offer it, which you're pretty referring to, Greg, which is the kind of standard, like, oh, you've been employed this long, we'll give you this much severance. Then there's the risk management severance packages, which are, we might have actually screwed this one up. So we don't want this person to stay here. They're, from a practical standpoint, they're poisoning the well. It's not good. They're in the purple part of this chart. We can't afford to keep them, but we can't afford to not pay them a healthy severance either, because we don't want to be dealing with litigation down the road. So that's alive and well as well.
Right. Totally makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next one, area or topic of our 4, productivity tracking. So this morning, my wife is a huge Today fan show watcher, and actually heard it on the Wall Street Journal podcast this morning too. Just the travel companies, whether it's the hotel industry or the airlines, have been reporting the highest number of travelers, more vacationers this past September than they had in 2019. So what's interesting is that, the comments around this in the Wall Street Journal and the Today Show were discussing how so many people, because they can work remotely, are now able to take vacations during times that they wouldn't take them either, which immediately brought me to the question of, well, if somebody's on vacation, aren't they on vacation and not working remotely? There seems to be a big difference here. And this is, a topic of certain areas, like if you're in manufacturing or warehouse, or, some of the blue collar, it's easier to track sort of, okay, we're putting out this many widgets or whatever the product is. In some areas, in some professional services, it's a little bit harder to gauge the productivity. And I had a lunch yesterday with a human resources professional that, the lines are blurred around, you talked about this earlier of, in the beginning of COVID, people just worked for hours and hours, it wasn't an 8-hour day, but now it's, well, I'm running my child to here, or I'm running my child to there, or I've, got this, appointment in the middle of the day. So the lines are really blurred. It's not sort of the, 9 to 5 Dolly Parton sort of job anymore, but you might start at 7 and end at 9 o'clock at night, but you took 5 hours during the course of the day to do other things. So what are you seeing in terms of productivity tracking and the opportunities for employers and employees to kind of get to a similar landing spot?
Yeah, so it's an interesting time for all the reasons you mentioned, Greg. I think those are really fascinating and definitely a big topic of conversation, like you said, on the news. in different places. And it's a particularly interesting issue when you talk about hourly workers too versus salary, because there's a couple different considerations here. There's pay considerations. So when you're dealing with hourly workers, are they working the hours that they say they're working, and are they working overtime that you're not aware of, right? So what kind of exposure do you have there? With salary workers, slightly different but similar issues, but you've got less of a overtime and pay concern and more of a I'm paying them a salary as the work getting done concern, right? So historically, obviously, employers are always looking for ways to track productivity, how employees are doing, how profitable they are, all those types of things. And there's no shortage of traditional ways to do that in office. A lot of it's reviews, different things that we've already discussed. Well, now that we have remote workers and everyone's on a computer and have all this lovely technology that we all use every day, there are a ton more options for employers to track how productive employees are being at home from a technology standpoint. Some industries, it's really easy without any super tech, let's call it, to tell how employees are doing. So if someone's churning out a certain amount of documents every day, or a certain, touching a certain amount of files, or there's ways that in certain industries it's easier to kind of tell if the job's getting done. Whereas a lot of industries, it can be really hard to tell. And you could really get far along in the process before you realize someone isn't really doing their job. So,
right, they're taking one of those vacations that we just talked about on the Today Show. Like
all of a sudden you get on a video call with them and you're like, where are you?
Right.
You look like, is that a beach in the background? Everyone's got the fuzzy backgrounds on now, so no one can see they're at the beach. But so it's definitely an issue. I think that my clients have taken kind of a couple of different approaches. One is the more traditional manner, even though people are remote, which is just kind of, managing them, some of the things we've discussed. And then others have started exploring the actual, what I would call more in the surveillance realm of things and more tracking everything. So, on the slide, we talk a little bit about these challenges and then the technology versus just kind of the more standard. But there's a ton of technology out there now that can track keystrokes, can track who, when you log in, when you log off, all the way down to how quickly it takes you to read a document, like how quickly you read it, all types of things. There was actually a really good, I believe it was the New York Times, had an article about this where I clicked on it, and I don't know if this was just a gimmick or if this really was tracking me or not, but it was giving you a productivity score of how efficiently you read the article.
Oh my.
So at the end of the article, it told you how long it took you to read it, whether that was good or bad, and what your score was on reading it. So you can take it all the way to that extreme. So I think one extreme of the technology is, are you logged on? When are you logged on? Are you working the hours that you said you are? And do I care? That's all kind of in this bucket, right? And then we have a whole nother bucket that if you could really take it to some things that people have only seen in nightmares, I'd say, which is actually linking people's pay to how productive they are, how quickly they're reading things, all the way to that extreme, which is what this article was demonstrating. And I'll tell you personally, when I realized they were giving me a score on reading, I didn't feel so great about it. I was kind of like feeling a little yucky about this. So,
well, high pressure environment there. It's like being under the bright lights of being investigated by some detectives. Where were you on Tuesday, July 23rd, right? And you're going, I don't know, I don't remember, and you can't pass. So
and they're like, oh, well, we'll look it up and we'll find it for you.
Right, exactly. Well, and you mentioned some of the technology, side of things, and what's out there. I don't know how people would feel about that. And do you have to let them know that they are being tracked, and employees are being tracked in that way? I mean, you've got some considerations up here that go there. That would be my biggest thing. First and foremost, you need to let employees know specifically, if you're literally tracking how quickly they're typing, right, and their keystrokes. Similar to, obviously we know what the social media sites do, how many seconds you spend on a particular video or ad, how more frequently that comes up through that side of things. We're kind of some employers may be going in that direction, but what are those requirements from the employer and the utilization of it?
So most employers will have just kind of broad policies around, I can access your email, I can access your computer at any time. You have no expectation. It's really setting the fact that there's no expectation of privacy. And so historically, even before this most recent technology, and maybe we'll see on a federal level, stuff moves so slow. So maybe we'll see that catch up, but on a state level, there's going to be some state by state adjustments to this. But generally speaking, employers set an expectation that there is no expectation of privacy as it relates to their work emails, work computers, anything issued by the company. And the more historic reason for that is, well, when I terminate an employee, I want to get everything back. I want to stop all of their access, and I want to be able to find everything that was going on. And that's usually the reason, also to manage employees and things like that. So now we're just taking this to more of an extreme. So in most instances, employers have set those types of policies and don't need to necessarily go beyond that to say, I'm monitoring you to that level. There are some exceptions to that. I mean, if you are remotely going in and turning people's cameras on and things like that, then that's going to be an issue. I wouldn't put it past people to do things like that, but hopefully most people aren't considering that option. Some states are going to have more privacy laws around this. I'm not a California attorney, but I venture a guess that California's got some strict rules on this, right? So there are going to be some state by state exceptions. And then there's the practical answer to your question, Greg, which is, do we tell employees this? And, because if we're going to use it, and this kind of brings me to some of these other points, is that, how are we going to use it? And we don't want to just pop out of nowhere saying, you're not performing appropriately. And by the way, we've seen that you've been doing this, 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 and this, and we've been watching you. That's probably from a practical standpoint in managing employees, creating a culture, really not the way you're going to want to handle things. Also leads to potential for targeting certain employees instead of others and disparate treatment there and things like that. So wouldn't recommend that either.
Yeah, I mean, like you said at the beginning, the way that you were reading that article changed your behavior, as you mentioned in this last, bullet point here of, the practical realities. I mean, so it is an interesting, thing because as you said, the technology is there, but what's the best way to use that? And I think that, it's going to go back to your answers you mentioned before. It depends. Right, for each organization and how that's there, because somebody could be logged in, during, whatever it is, 8 to 5 or 8:30 to 5, and just logged in, right? Maybe they're not necessarily, doing a whole lot, but until you really get into the tracking side of things, you're not necessarily going to see that. Obviously, you're going to see the output and so forth, and doing it that way, which is the way we all, sort of manage folks prior to COVID and being at home more frequently.
And I think there's been a huge desire to want to track people because of the remote work as well. And it's only as reliable as your data. And the one thing I'll mention in closing before we move to the next topic is just, there is definitely, in addition to some of the practical issues, there's definitely some compliance issues. So like the National Labor Relations Act is something that employers don't think about very often because they think about it in the context of unions. However, it also is the concerted protective activity is a big one for all employers under the National Labor Relations Act, which allows employees to essentially band together and talk poorly about the company if they want to, right? So if we start monitoring everything that employees are saying and doing, and now managers have access to that information, they might start acting retaliatorily towards people, not realizing that they're doing that. So there's a lot of landmines to trip over on this topic, which is the reason for good policies, good thoughtful planning, because you just might not even, just like with the workers' comp thing from working from home, these just might not be things that will come to mind readily. There's some initial things that are pretty easy to identify, like, oh, an employee probably doesn't want me watching them on their video all day when they're at home, because that seems really terrible. And that one comes naturally to people, I think, to think about. But there's a lot of potential compliance issues that can come from this.
Yeah, certainly a tricky topic. But I mean, in talking with a lot of the HR professionals that we work with, I haven't heard anybody really doing this in the scary sort of surveillance way, for lack of a better term, where they're maybe going above and beyond what. Have you seen that much? I mean, you said, do you have any clients that are really tracking like keystroke sort of thing at this point?
I don't. I've seen it with larger companies. I do have some clients that they didn't realize they were tracking this information. So that's another thing to really consider. That's a very practical tip that I'll give to everyone, which is, like I said in my first bullet here, a lot of the systems you might already have and be using have these technology available as options. And you might put a system on that you're using for something else, and it might be tracking this information, and some information might exist somewhere. So talk to your IT folks, talk to your vendors, and find out if this information is happening. Because I've had clients who say, like, they're writing someone up for a performance issue, and then the tech person's like, oh, I can give you exactly when they logged in and logged off and when they were active. And the company goes, wait, you can? Wait, we're tracking that? So we're not all going to be tech geniuses, but you want to consider those things.
And helpful tip, we found out that through our license with Zoom, that it literally tracks all of that stuff. How many meetings you've had, how many hours or minutes you've been in, per month, and so forth. And we had no idea. We just kind of found it in Zoom about everybody in the organization. And not that we intended to find that or have that, but it was there, as you mentioned. It's just sometimes it's there. The tech is there, and you might not even know that you have it. But
yeah.
All right. So last area, employee compensation strategy, which this is when you saw I think it was 47 million folks changed jobs in 2021, the highest number voluntarily. This is beyond the remote side of things. This is the other side. People are leaving for, in some cases, significantly higher pay. I've heard that across the board, it really, regardless of industry, for the most part, because we work a lot of different types of companies and industries. This is, what are the other areas besides the traditional components of compensation? What are the other things that you've got a couple listed here of what you're seeing being offered by employers?
Yeah, and so here's a couple ones that you guys may have heard of: retention bonuses, phantom equity, and profit sharing. So different goals with these, and kind of the idea with some of the compensation methods that we'll talk about today is, so salary increases and pay rate increases are seen as a little bit more of a permanent thing, and they have very specific goals. So some companies, given the labor market, can't compete with other companies and just throw more money at it, right? That's not always something that's going to work for a company. It's not always something that makes sense to solve a short-term problem, because when you increase people's salaries, I mean, that's a long-term balance sheet adjustment for the company. It's not that you can't reduce people's salaries. In Maryland, you can. You just need to give them notice, proper notice under the statute. But it's a rare thing that we do unless someone's not performing well, right? Because it's like, no one feels good about a salary decrease or a pay rate decrease, and probably aren't going to stick around.
You're probably heading down that purple line pretty quick, I would imagine.
Exactly. They're like, well, I'm doing a great job. They're like, well, we just can't pay you that salary anymore. Well, okay, looks like I'm looking for another job. So it's there's some other ways, especially in this tight labor market, to incentivize employees. So retention bonuses are one-time bonuses that those kind of the goal with those often are either at the hiring stage of getting someone on board and having them stay long enough that they can integrate and are more likely to stay long-term, or you're trying to do get through a certain season, your busy season, like if it's in accounting, like the tax season or whatever it may be, to try to get people in a labor market where people are changing jobs a lot, get them to stay during those challenging times, after a sale, those types of things. Phantom equity and profit sharing that have a slightly different goal, which is to try to align the goals of the employee with the company. And so this can have great cultural impacts as far as aligning, well, the company does well, I do well, helping employees understand a little bit better and think more about the company doing well, what that means, how does my role help the company do well, and can really start aligning employees and companies and make it a little bit, and work well from a retention standpoint as well, but it's kind of a longer term plan. I think people shy away from these sometimes because they're not simple to put in place.
Right.
There's and this is a little bit into your area a little bit, Greg, but from a benefits standpoint and deferred compensation and planning for people and for companies, there's a little meat on the bone here as far as making sure that you're compliant with tax guidelines, that it makes sense for employees and isn't going to hurt their overall financial goals and plans, how these how this income is going to be treated, those types of things. So they take some doing to put them in place, but that doesn't mean not to do it. Can have really good benefits. It just means you've got to really be thoughtful in your approach and how things get handled when people are terminated, things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I know, certainly the bottom two kind of get more into our area of expertise of what I know, because you tell that by the questions, but we're, as a firm, we're looking at implementing a program, like a phantom equity or SARS type program, which is stock appreciation rights. But it's complicated. All of those deferred compensation programs are complicated. It's unlike a 401k or 403b, where it's like the employee can defer and then there's a match, and maybe you have a profit sharing component, which we're starting to see come back a little bit, which had basically gone away for more than a decade, right? 15 years. But because it's almost the deferred compensation world is so vast, it's hard to narrow down what you're really trying to accomplish and what the best approach is for each organization, because there are so many different ways to structure it, whether it's for every employee or just keep folks or so forth. But we've had a lot more conversations with our plan sponsors about these types of programs to help from a retention perspective, because they don't really help on the front end too much, because typically the vesting periods for those are a little bit longer, but they can be incredibly beneficial long term for that employee. And as you said, aligning their interests with the organization and building that culture that you hope to get, that we just haven't seen as more employees have become very transitional and staying at a job for 2-3 years and moving on to the next place.
Yeah, and then one thing to keep in mind from the legal perspective, in addition to some of the compliance things, is that these can be discriminatory in nature. So we've got to be thoughtful about it as well. Who you're offering it to, there's sometimes requirements around that as well, but you've got to just be thoughtful in your approach. I think moral of the story on a lot of these things is give it some thought and
hire a very good professional to help you with that from a legal perspective and a tax perspective, to avoid 409A rules or pension rules or whatever you're going to sort of encounter along the way. But there are a lot of really unique ways to do it. I think the second part of that is really the employee communication side, because they are ambiguous and there's a lot of flexibility. Communicating them correctly is sometimes very hard to do because it is so subjective. It's not hey, you get this match every year, right? Some of them, there's a lot of flexibility, and you got to make sure that it does a benefit that you're trying to offer doesn't turn into this plan that doesn't make any sense to people. And they're like, it's not really, I don't really get it. So they're not factoring that into the compensation equation.
Yeah. And on the termination side too, what happens when you terminate, talk to your manager. I've got a fire truck coming by. I don't know if you can hear that or not.
Just briefly, you're good now, I think.
I live in the city, so and then just in closing here, because I know we're kind of getting close to the time, there's a couple other things to consider doing that are a little bit more simple than the ones we've just discussed, but they're not raising the salary, but can encourage people to stay and be helpful to them. Mileage reimbursements, we saw gas prices go up like crazy. Some people were saying, well, I'll increase my employees' pay to offset those prices. Well, now you've got an increased pay even when the gas prices come down. So looking at mileage reimbursement instead, some different options like that, education programs and training. And there are ways to structure education and training if it's not required for the job. And there's some nuance to this where you can get reimbursed if employees leave. So you can offer them the benefit. They feel really great about it. They're increasing their education, it helps the company, but then you can also, if they leave, recoup those costs potentially. Something to consider there. A lot of use of fringe benefit programs, external and internal. And then, like we've been discussing, the liberal leave policies are a big selling point right now. A lot of work-life balance, a lot of people wanting to travel after COVID, things like that. So those can be huge ways to incentivize people. Leave is wages. So we want to make sure, again, we put tight rules around these, know what we're doing, have good rules, but so that you don't end up with someone with 400 hours of PTO in the bank or something. But, offering a lot of those policies I've seen have been very successful for people.
Yeah, we've been hearing a lot more of these conversations as well around just the overall benefits, saying like a gas card rather than, an increase in compensation, for those employees that are coming to work, right, versus the remote folks. Or the education side, there's also the student loan debt solutions that exist in the marketplace, consolidation, employer benefits that are likely, that you can, get it from a tax deduction perspective if you want to offer things along those lines, which we've, started to see. And there might be some changes on the 401k side about student loan debt coming, here in the next year or so. So we'll continue to see, all that stuff. And I know we had we just had a question come in. An employee referral bonus could be helpful as well. More of a comment, I think, if current employees can bring in someone if they know would be successful at the job. And that is 100% true. I think literally our last 3 hires at Greenspring have all come from employee referrals. Yeah. And, if they stay here for a period of time, you get a bonus, which has been a huge benefit from a recruiting perspective. So
yeah, make sure you put rules around it though, because it's wages and it's bonuses, and we've got to policies for these things.
It's like giving out the Target gift cards that for $35 that become taxable to everybody at the end of the year, right? Exactly. So, you got to be very careful about that. So, in closing, again, Sarah, thank you so much for lending your time, insights, and expertise. This was terrific. I know I learned a lot and have a few takeaways from the conversation today. As well as some new terms that I've learned. So, and thanks to everybody who joined today, especially those that, I think it was Amanda who submitted that last comment, which was super helpful for everybody. And before we close, just a quick reminder that recertification for SHRM professional development credit will be delivered by Friday. I will be sending that email out to all the attendees that were here for that time. And then if you have any additional questions or you're interested in a copy of the presentation, please reach out to your contact at Greenspring or to Sarah, and we can certainly get that out to you for your viewing. So again, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day and happy Halloween.
Thanks. Thank you, Greg.